Everybody wants the benefits of growth, but nobody really wants the part where growth exposes you first. And that's what makes Jalen Duren's story so interesting right now. Because for a while, Duren was looked at as one of the bright young pieces in Detroit's future. The athleticism was obvious. The power was obvious. The upside was obvious. You could see why people believed in him. But the playoffs have a way of speeding up the truth. Things that don't get punished in the regular season suddenly matter. Bad positioning gets exposed. Fouls become louder. Missed rotations feel bigger. Every mistake gets magnified because the game slows down for everybody watching, but speeds up for the player living inside it. And over the past few weeks, that's been the conversation around Duren. People have been questioning his defensive discipline, his awareness, his ability to stay out of foul trouble, his decision-making, his readiness for high-pressure basketball. And what makes that difficult is that none of it means he isn't talented. That's actually what makes it harder. Because when you're talented, people expect the growth to be automatic. They see the body, the athletic ability, the flashes, and assume everything else should just arrive on time. But that's not how development works. At some point, talent gets you noticed. Then pressure asks if you're ready to become dependable. And that's a completely different test. That's why this moment matters for Duren. Not because his future is suddenly in question after one rough stretch, but because he's reached a part of the journey where potential alone isn't enough to protect him from criticism. And for a young player, that can shake you. Because it's one thing to be called the future when everything is theoretical. It's another thing to be in a playoff series, on the floor with real responsibilities, and suddenly everybody can see the parts of your game that still need work. That's a hard place to be. And it's not just a basketball thing. A lot of young men know exactly what that feels like. You start trying to build something. You start believing you can become more. Maybe you get a little momentum. Maybe people start seeing potential in you. Then life puts you in a situation where potential doesn't help anymore. Now you have to be disciplined. Now you have to be composed. Now you have to make better decisions when emotions are high. Now you have to prove that you can handle responsibility, not just look like someone who can. And that's usually where the real work begins. Because adversity doesn't always show up to destroy you. Sometimes it shows up to reveal the version of you that can't come with you to the next level. That's what I see when I look at Duren right now. Not a player with no future. A player getting introduced to the cost of becoming the player people can believe he can be. There's a difference. The easy take is to say he struggled. He wasn't ready. The moment was too big. And there's truth in some of that. But the more interesting question is what he does with it. Because this is the stage where a lot of players and a lot of people in general go one of two ways. Some people take criticism as confirmation that they're not built for it. They get embarrassed. They get defensive. They shut down. And slowly the gap between who they could be and who they become gets wider. But other people let the momentum humble them in the right way. They don't run from what got exposed. They study it. They sit with it. They come back sharper, calmer, more aware. And usually when people make that kind of jump, it doesn't just happen because everything went smoothly. It happens because something uncomfortable forced them to grow up. That's the part of Duren's story that feels bigger than basketball. Because every young man eventually meets a version of life that doesn't care about potential. It only responds to preparation. It doesn't care how gifted you are. It doesn't care how much people used to believe in you. It doesn't care what you looked like when things were easy. It asks one simple question. Can you adjust? That's the real test Duren is facing. Not whether he can dunk, not whether he can rebound, not whether he has the physical tools. Everybody can see the tools. The question now is whether he can turn those tools into trust. Can the Pistons trust him late in games? Can he stay disciplined when emotions rise? Can he anchor possessions without fouling? Can he process the game fast enough when the playoffs take away easy reads? That's the difference between being talented and being reliable. And reliability is where respect really starts. Because highlights make people excited, but dependability makes people believe in you. That's what this next chapter is about for Jalen Duren. He's not being asked to become perfect overnight. He's being asked to mature through what the moment just showed him. Maybe this rough stretch ends up being one of the most important things that could have happened to him. Not because struggling is good, but because sometimes you need the game to tell you the truth before you're ready to change. And if Duren responds the right way, people might look back at this moment differently. Not as the stretch that exposed him, but as the stretch that sharpened him. The moment where he realized that being gifted gets you into the conversation, but discipline keeps you there. And that's the part I think a lot of young men can take from this without even being told. You don't become who you're supposed to become by avoiding the moments that challenge you. Sometimes you become that person because the moments challenged you, embarrassed you a little, showed you what you still need to work on, and forced you to decide whether you were serious. That's where Jalen Duren is right now, standing in that uncomfortable space between potential and responsibility. And what happens next will tell us a lot more about him than the criticism ever could.